On an August morning in 2022, the city of Amara was thrown into chaos when news of a gruesome murder spread rapidly. David Armstrong, a beloved yet controversial soccer coach, was found dead in his private apartment. At 52, he was not only a prominent name in the sports world, but also held the powerful position of selecting players for the national team. Rumors about David's complex personal life and murky influence had long been whispered, but no one expected him to be brutally murdered. His luxurious apartment turned into a horrific crime scene. David's lifeless body lay cold on the living room floor, riddled with wounds, blood splattered across the floor. The furniture was scattered, many items broken, cabinet doors flung open, hinting at a fierce struggle before he drew his last breath. The police classified it as a premeditated murder. Far from an ordinary brawl, they suspected that someone had deliberately decided to end the life of this notorious yet influential coach. David's death quickly became a hot topic. Rumors surrounding his secret relationships and underground dealings were immediately fanned into flames. The community was not only shocked but also outraged, as David was known for being unapproachable, and many believed he had used his power to manipulate those seeking fame in the soccer world. Whispers of secret relationships and shady deals were no longer mere rumors. They became bitter truths in the eyes of the people of Amara. The crime scene and David's tangled relationships made the case the center of attention, not just for the media but for the entire community. Who killed David? What was the motive? These unanswered questions and ambiguous details turned the case into an unsettling mystery, shaking a community that prided itself on traditional values and moral standards. Yousef Mahdi, 40, was a devoted Muslim father, living by the traditional values of family and community. He was known for his strictness and discipline, not only with others but with himself, holding honor and faith as the compass guiding his life. Yet there was one thing Yousef was never prepared for, facing a challenge that would test the very fabric of his beliefs, driven by the love he had for his son, Ibrahim. To Yousef, Ibrahim was more than just a son. He was a beacon of hope, someone who could bring pride to the family. Every night, Yousef prayed for Ibrahim to achieve his dreams, never imagining that such aspirations would drag him into an unforgivable sin. Ibrahim Aziz, 18, was a promising young footballer who had poured his entire youth into his passion for the sport. In the eyes of his father and the community, Ibrahim was a symbol of success and future glory. But with hope came an overwhelming burden. He knew that his dream was not solely a personal ambition but a family expectation. The burning desire to be selected for the national team was so intense that Ibrahim was willing to sacrifice everything to achieve it. Yet he could never have anticipated that this longing would pull his father into a dangerous game with no escape. At the center of this story was David Armstrong, a foreign football coach with a far-reaching but mysterious and notorious influence. Those in the sports circles of Amara were familiar with David's name, a figure renowned for his ability to recruit and train top players. But behind the illustrious reputation lurked chilling rumors about a man who would stop at nothing to maintain his power. It was said that David had no qualms about exploiting the vulnerable or those hungry for success, bending them to his own terms. Young players like Ibrahim were perfect prey for David, individuals ready to shatter every limit to achieve their dreams of greatness. David was more than a coach. He wielded power that could either make a player's dreams come true or push them into despair with a single decision. His shadowy connections and double life made many wary and kept their distance, yet it was precisely this covert power that tempted desperate men like Yousef. What many didn't realize was that David Armstrong didn't only manipulate young players but also parents like Yousef, drawing them into a calculated, sinful game. A game where the victor could never remain pure. When Ibrahim was not selected for the national team, Yousef saw all hope for his son's future beginning to crumble. In desperation, he decided to meet David Armstrong, the powerful coach who held the ability to change any player's fate. David's office was on the top floor of an opulent building, one that was not easily accessed without an invitation. The gleaming doors, walls adorned with numerous trophies and medals, exuded power, and David was the sole authority within. As he stepped into the room, Yousef felt an icy, mysterious atmosphere enveloping every corner. David's gaze lingered on him longer than normal, sharp and scrutinizing, making Yousef feel as if he were being weighed by a man with the power of life and death. David listened to Yousef's pleas with an indifferent expression, and then the unthinkable happened. David slowly proposed that he would help Ibrahim get into the national team, but with one horrific condition: Yousef had to agree to be part of a secret homosexual relationship with him. The word stunned Yousef. As a devout Muslim, he found himself at an impasse with no escape. Horrified, he refused immediately, but David merely smirked, pouring out taunts and relentless coercion. Faced with this predicament, Yousef felt powerless. The love and aspirations for his son's future began to shake the principles he had safeguarded his entire life. Finally, under the weight of pressure and threats, Yousef conceded to the price David demanded. From that moment, the secret relationship between Yousef and David officially began, not born out of mutual consent, but under veiled threats and blatant manipulation. Each time he met David, Yousef felt as if his honor and dignity were being torn apart. David's threats never ceased, always reminding him that if Yousef ever spoke out, he would destroy Ibrahim's future. Living in fear and torment, Yousef spiraled into guilt and depression, gradually distancing himself from his family. Sleepless nights, haunted by shame and terror, left him drowning in darkness with no escape. Yousef knew he was sacrificing his own honor for his son's dream, but the price became increasingly severe. Deep down, he realized he had become a puppet in David's hands, a man whose fame was merely a facade, a dark power and hideous secrets. After accepting the deal with David, Yousef found himself increasingly trapped in a spiral of fear and humiliation. David did not merely want Yousef's submission. He relished the newfound power. He held the absolute control over the life and honor of a devout father. Each secret encounter deepened Yousef's anxiety, like a blade cutting into the pride and faith he once cherished. As time passed, David began to challenge Yousef not just physically but mentally. He imposed increasingly severe demands, ensuring that Yousef could never escape his grasp. "If you tell the truth, don't forget that I can ruin Ibrahim with just one phone call," David whispered during one meeting, his voice icy and sending Yousef further into despair. Those threats haunted Yousef at every waking moment, reminding him of the terrible cost of this sinful agreement. Gradually, Yousef felt himself becoming more withdrawn, retreating into darkness and slipping into a state of depression. The once resilient and strict father was now a shadow of himself, imprisoned by guilt and fear. He avoided the eyes of others, especially Ibrahim, the son for whom he had once vowed to sacrifice everything to protect and uplift. Each time Yousef saw Ibrahim, he was consumed by a silent shame that gnawed at his soul, knowing he no longer deserved his son's trust and love. Family life grew distant and cold. Yousef's wife noticed the drastic change in him, but whenever she asked, Yousef would remain silent, evasive, and sometimes snap for no reason. Inside, his torment became unbearable. Yousef knew that his honor, his faith, and even the love of his family were all under threat, controlled by the man he once believed was the only one who could help Ibrahim achieve his dream. Ibrahim began to notice strange changes in his father. The man who was once firm and resilient now seemed to live in a state of constant tension and anxiety. Yousef started to be away from home more often, avoided Ibrahim's eyes, and always acted mysteriously, as if hiding something. Doubt gradually took over Ibrahim's mind. He decided to follow his father, hoping that his suspicions were just unfounded. But the truth is always harsher than any doubt. One night, Ibrahim trailed his father to a small, discreet hotel on the outskirts of the city. From a distance, he saw Yousef entering a room where David Armstrong was already waiting. The dim light inside cast shadows through the window, allowing Ibrahim a brief glimpse of David's cold face and his father's tense expression. Though he couldn't hear what was happening, Ibrahim seemed to understand everything. The truth struck him like a knife to the heart. The father he revered, whom he believed would do anything to uphold the family's honor, had become entangled in a dark relationship with the very man Ibrahim once admired as a respected coach. When Yousef returned home, Ibrahim did not hesitate. He confronted his father, eyes filled with disappointment and anger. After a moment of silence, Yousef decided to confess everything. He told Ibrahim about the sacrifice he had endured to protect his dream, the desperation that forced him to accept David's cruel proposition. Yet every word of explanation only deepened Ibrahim's disappointment and sense of betrayal. To him, the father he once loved had become a stranger, a man willing to trade his dignity for success. The father-son relationship was severely fractured. Ibrahim no longer saw his father as a protector, but as a man weakened and controlled by another. A heavy silence settled between them, and finally Ibrahim left the room without saying another word. In desperation, Yousef decided to meet David one last time. He wanted to end everything, to stop before things became irreparable. Yousef entered David's office with a determined look, unlike any before. He demanded that David put an end to it all, and threatened to reveal the entire truth if David continued to threaten his family. However, David only responded with a cold smile. His expression remained unmoved by Yousef's threat. Instead, he retorted sharply, threatening to destroy Ibrahim's career and turn his dream into a nightmare if Yousef did not comply. Yousef left David's office, his heart heavy and mind crushed by fear and guilt. The next morning, David Armstrong's lifeless body was discovered in his private apartment, his face frozen in an expression of terror, as if witnessing something horrific before his death. The scene was drenched in blood, furniture overturned, as if a fierce struggle had just taken place. The apartment was quiet, cold, stifling, enveloped in an atmosphere of death and mystery. Just hours later, the police centered their suspicion on Yousef Mahdi, the man seen last on the security footage leaving David's apartment the night before the murder. The final call from David's phone was also to Yousef's number, evidence that immediately made him the prime suspect. In the interrogation room, Yousef sat motionless, sweat seeping through his shirt despite the cold air. Facing the steely gaze of the investigators, he felt his heartbeat pounding fiercely in his chest. Every question they asked, every scrutinizing glance, felt like a vise tightening around his spirit. He knew he didn't kill David, but how could he explain all these unfortunate coincidences? Being the last person to leave the apartment, and the fact that David's last received call was from him. Everything pointed to him as if marked by guilt. When asked to recount the events, Yousef stammered a vague story. He knew every word he said was being meticulously analyzed, and the more he tried to explain, the more disjointed and inconsistent his story became. The police missed no detail, paying attention to every minor gesture, from his averted eyes to the hesitation in his voice. These nuances only heightened the investigators' suspicions. The feeling of being cornered made it impossible for Yousef to escape the shadow of guilt and fear. The more he tried to stay calm, the more he felt suffocated by the overwhelming tension. As if there was no way out, Yousef was forced to confess to the secret relationship with David, a relationship he had been coerced into to protect his son's future. This confession, rather than lifting the suspicion, only convinced the police that he had a motive. Everything he said seemed full of contradictions and did nothing to protect him from the investigators' stern eyes. The pressure in the interrogation room seemed to double. The investigators left, leaving Yousef feeling hollow and trapped, with only fear and doubt remaining. What initially appeared to be a straightforward case was now shrouded in mystery and guilt, making Yousef feel as though he were sinking deeper into darkness with no way out. The investigation into David Armstrong's death seemed to have reached a dead end as all suspicions centered around Yousef Mahdi. However, a clue from the security camera shifted the case in an unexpected direction, shocking the investigators. On that quiet night, a camera near David's apartment captured an image of a young man leaving the building on the night of the murder. He walked briskly, almost in panic, glancing over his shoulder repeatedly. When the footage was enhanced, the police recognized him as Nabil, a promising young player on David's team, who once had all the qualities to become a star for the national team. But everything had crumbled, leaving Nabil an outsider. Nabil was once the bright hope of Amara's football, with unmatched talent and fierce ambition. He had come close to making the national team, but at the last moment, David Armstrong, the coach who was the embodiment of Nabil's dreams, suddenly dropped him. This was not just a shock to Nabil, but a deep betrayal, plunging him into a pit of resentment and bitterness. David, who once meant everything to Nabil, had become a dark shadow he was determined to erase at any cost. The unusual sighting on the camera piqued the investigators' interest further. An air of mystery and tension filled the room as the police delved deeper into Nabil's past, uncovering fragments of the grudge he bore against David. Nabil's presence on the night of the murder was no mere coincidence. His panicked expression made the police wonder, what was he running from? What truth could instill such fear in him? These questions only deepened the case's strangeness and danger. During a more thorough examination of the crime scene, police unexpectedly found an object carelessly discarded under the sofa, blood-stained and still damp, bearing fingerprints. The forensic results stunned the entire investigation team into silence. The fingerprints belonged to Nabil. This discovery was an undeniable confirmation, turning Nabil from a witness to the prime suspect. This bloody evidence convinced the investigators that Nabil not only had a clear motive but also the perfect opportunity to end David's life. To the investigators, the case was no longer just about a father's forced relationship. It had become the story of an enraged young athlete willing to pay any price to reclaim justice. Was David Armstrong's death the inevitable consequence of manipulating others? Or was it the explosive act of a young soul with nothing left to lose, seeking vengeance for the betrayal of a once admired idol? These questions, along with the shadow of Nabil's past, ignited public and police curiosity alike, turning the case into a labyrinth of guilt with no way out. The interrogation took an unexpected turn when Nabil Idris, the promising young footballer, began to open up about what had transpired between him and coach David Armstrong. The interrogation room's light cast a harsh glow on Nabil's tired, tense face, his eyes reflecting both pain and anger. When asked about his motive, Nabil fell silent, hesitating as if cornered. Finally, he revealed a secret he had suppressed for too long. David had once promised to secure him a place on the national team if he agreed to engage in a homosexual relationship with him. David knew that Nabil wanted his dream more than anything and exploited that desire without hesitation. Nabil's voice was low, almost a whisper, but each word gradually unveiled the toxic relationship between them. He recounted how he felt when David made promises, only to see them dissolve into nothing when the team was announced without his name. The feeling of being used, betrayed, and abandoned drove Nabil into a state of despair and resentment. To him, David was no longer the mentor he once looked up to, but had become a symbol of deception and humiliation. That pain erupted into uncontrollable anger. During the interrogation, Nabil's voice quivered, yet it held an eerie calm as he recounted the moment he confronted David that night. He could not hide the bitterness in his voice when admitting that he attacked David. It was not a decision made in a moment of impulse, but born out of hatred and accumulated humiliation over months. To him, it was the only way to end the cycle of exploitation, an ultimate act of vengeance against the man who had shattered his dreams and dignity. The police sat in silence, listening to Nabil's confession, the atmosphere in the interrogation room growing thick and heavy. This was more than just a statement. It was the outpouring of a young man pushed into darkness by someone he once trusted. Nabil's confession did not just close the murder case, but opened up a series of questions about trust and the abuse of power within the world of football, making the story more complex and haunting than ever before. The trial of Nabil Idris garnered significant public attention. The courtroom was packed. Everyone wanted to witness a case that exposed the dark corners of the sports world, the hidden secrets behind the glamour of the football field. At the defendant's table, Nabil sat with his head bowed, his face showing exhaustion after days of detention and interrogation. His confessions from the interrogation room regarding his motives and actions were presented in court with cold, painful detail, sending shivers down the spines of many attendees. The prosecutor portrayed Nabil as a talented young man who found himself in an unforeseen situation. He had become a victim of David Armstrong's power and manipulation, a man once respected but, in reality, someone who exploited the trust and ambition of young players. However, the prosecutor emphasized that no matter how complicated Nabil's reasons were, murder could not be justified. Betrayal and deceit had driven Nabil to a desperate act, but before the law, he still had to answer for his crime. When the judge announced the sentence, the atmosphere in the courtroom seemed to freeze. Nabil was found guilty of second-degree murder and faced a 25-year prison sentence without the possibility of early parole. The sentence echoed like a blow to everyone who had followed the case from the beginning. The sight of Nabil being handcuffed and escorted out of the courtroom, his eyes empty and full of despair, served as a grim reminder of the consequences of manipulation and betrayal. Yousef Mahdi, who had once been the prime suspect in the case, was now exonerated. However, the price he and his family paid was immense. The Mahdi family's honor had been deeply scarred, and within the local Muslim community, they now faced looks of doubt and whispers of gossip. What had happened in the shadows, now brought to light, was not only the death of David Armstrong but also the loss of honor and trust for a family once highly respected. The case sent shockwaves not only through the Muslim community but also throughout the sports world. It laid bare the dark side of power manipulation and how individuals abused their positions for personal gain. The promises, dreams, and ambitions of young players were now nothing more than fragments of a painful reality. And for the Mahdi family, the wound left by this case was unhealable, a scar they would carry forever.